It's dawn in ancient Greece, around 480 BC. The morning mist clings to the ground as hundreds of bronze-clad warriors stand in perfect formation. Their red cloaks flutter in the breeze, and their polished shields gleam like mirrors in the early sunlight. These aren't just any soldiers. These are Spartans, the most feared warriors in the ancient world. But here's what's fascinating. Before these legendary fighters ever stepped onto a battlefield, they performed a series of rituals and preparations that were just as important as their famous fighting skills. Today, we're going to dive deep into the mysterious world of Spartan pre-battle customs. Rituals that could mean the difference between victory and defeat, life and death. What you're about to discover will completely change how you think about ancient warfare. Because the Spartans didn't just fight with their bodies. They fought with their minds, their spirits, and their unshakable belief in divine favor. Before we dive into the specific rituals, we need to understand something crucial about Spartan society. These weren't just tough guys who liked to fight. They were a deeply religious people who believed that success in battle depended as much on divine approval as it did on military skill. Think about it this way. Imagine if your entire society was built around one single purpose: creating the perfect warrior. That was Sparta. From the moment a Spartan boy was born, every aspect of his life was designed to prepare him for war. But here's the twist. They also believed that no amount of training could guarantee victory without the gods on their side. The Spartans worshipped many gods, but none more important for warfare than Apollo, Artemis, and Ares. Apollo was their patron deity, the god of prophecy and divine guidance. Artemis was the huntress, goddess of the chase and precision. And Ares? Well, he was literally the god of war itself. But the Spartans had a unique relationship with their gods. They didn't just pray for victory. They demanded signs, omens, and clear divine approval before they would even consider going into battle. This wasn't superstition. This was military strategy. A Spartan army that believed the gods were with them was virtually unstoppable. But an army that doubted divine favor? They might not even show up to fight. This is why King Cleomenes once turned his entire army around and went home when the sacrificial omens were bad. Imagine that. One of the most powerful military forces in the ancient world, marching away from a battle they could have easily won, all because a sheep's liver didn't look right during the morning sacrifice. To understand Spartan pre-battle rituals, you have to understand this mindset. They weren't just preparing their bodies for war. They were preparing their souls, their minds, and their relationship with the divine. Every ritual, every ceremony, every sacred action was designed to align the warriors with cosmic forces that they believed controlled the outcome of battle. And here's something that might surprise you. This approach actually worked. The psychological impact of believing you have divine approval is enormous. It creates confidence, unity, and a kind of fearlessness that can make ordinary men do extraordinary things. The Spartans understood this long before modern psychology gave it a name. Now let's talk about one of the most famous and misunderstood Spartan pre-battle rituals: the combing and braiding of their hair. You've probably seen this in movies like 300, Spartan warriors with long flowing hair, carefully groomed before battle. But here's what Hollywood doesn't tell you. This wasn't about vanity or looking intimidating. This was a sacred ritual with deep religious and cultural meaning. According to Spartan law established by Lycurgus centuries earlier, a warrior's hair was a symbol of his freedom and his status as a full citizen soldier. But more than that, the act of grooming their hair before battle was a ritual preparation for death. Here's how it worked. On the morning of battle, Spartan warriors would gather in small groups. They would carefully comb each other's hair, braid it in traditional patterns, and anoint it with olive oil. This wasn't a quick process. It could take an hour or more for a full unit to complete the ritual. But why hair? In Spartan culture, your hair represented your life force, your identity, and your connection to your ancestors. By grooming their hair before battle, warriors were essentially preparing their souls for the possibility of death. They believed that if they died in battle with properly prepared hair, their spirits would be recognizable to their ancestors in the afterlife. There's a famous story from Thermopylae that illustrates this perfectly. When Persian scouts reported back to Xerxes that the Spartans were sitting around combing their hair, the Persian king was baffled. His advisor, Demaratus, an exiled Spartan king, explained, "These men are preparing to die gloriously, and they are adorning their heads according to their custom." The psychological impact of this ritual was enormous. Imagine being a Spartan warrior, carefully braiding your friend's hair while he does the same for you. You're both acknowledging that you might die today, but you're also affirming your brotherhood, your shared values, and your commitment to dying with honor if necessary. But the hair ritual had another purpose too. It was a form of meditation. The slow, careful process of grooming forced warriors to calm their minds, control their breathing, and enter a state of focused tranquility before the chaos of battle. Modern neuroscience tells us that repetitive, ritualistic activities like this actually do help regulate stress hormones and promote mental clarity. The Spartans also believed that well-groomed hair made them more terrifying to their enemies. There's something psychologically unsettling about facing an opponent who's so confident in their fighting ability that they took time to style their hair before trying to kill you. It sends a message. I'm so sure I'm going to win this fight that I made sure I'd look good doing it. If you thought the hair ritual was intense, wait until you hear about Spartan sacrifice ceremonies. These weren't simple prayers or offerings. They were elaborate, bloody rituals that could determine whether an entire army would march to war or turn around and go home. Every major military decision began with sacrifice. The Spartans would sacrifice animals, usually goats, sheep, or oxen, and examine their entrails for signs from the gods. But this wasn't random superstition. The Spartans had developed a sophisticated system of reading omens that was passed down through generations of priests and military leaders. The most important sacrifice happened at dawn on the day of battle. The king himself would perform the ritual, assisted by priests called Pythi, who were experts in interpreting divine signs. Here's how it worked. First, they would select a perfect animal. No blemishes, no scars, representing the purity of their cause. The animal would be led to a makeshift altar, often just a flat stone or elevated piece of ground. The king would say a prayer to Apollo, asking for guidance and victory. Then came the actual sacrifice. With a single swift cut, the animal's throat would be opened. The blood would be collected in sacred vessels and sprinkled on the warriors' shields and spear points. This wasn't just symbolic. The Spartans believed that the blood of the sacrifice would literally transfer divine power to their weapons. But the real drama came next. Reading the entrails. The priests would carefully examine the animal's liver, heart, lungs, and intestines, looking for specific signs. A healthy, normal-looking liver meant the gods approved of the battle. But if the liver was diseased, discolored, or oddly shaped, it was a sign that the gods opposed their cause. And here's the remarkable part. The Spartans would actually cancel battles based on these omens. There are historical records of Spartan armies turning back from major campaigns because the sacrificial signs were unfavorable. This happened so frequently that their enemies sometimes tried to manipulate the process by feeding diseased animals to Spartan scouts, hoping they'd be used for sacrifice. But the most dramatic sacrifice ritual was reserved for the most desperate situations. When facing overwhelming odds or fighting far from home, Spartan kings would sometimes perform human sacrifice. Yes, you heard that right. Human sacrifice. The most famous case was during the Persian Wars, when King Leonidas allegedly sacrificed Persian prisoners before the Battle of Thermopylae. This wasn't cruelty for its own sake. It was the ultimate appeal to the gods for divine intervention in a hopeless situation. The psychological impact of these sacrifice rituals cannot be overstated. For the warriors watching, seeing their king spill blood and receive favorable omens created an unshakable confidence. They weren't just fighting with their own strength. They were fighting with divine approval and supernatural power flowing through their weapons. But there was also a practical element to these rituals. The time spent on sacrifices gave commanders a chance to assess their troops, review their battle plans, and make last-minute adjustments. The ritual created a structured pause before the chaos of battle, allowing for final preparations and mental focusing. Now let's talk about something that gave Spartan armies one of their most distinctive characteristics: their battle songs. These weren't just random war chants. They were carefully composed hymns that served multiple purposes in pre-battle preparation. The most important of these was called the Paean, a sacred song dedicated to Apollo. But the Spartans had adapted this religious hymn into something uniquely military. Their version was slower, more rhythmic, and designed to synchronize the movements of hundreds of warriors marching in formation. Picture this scene. It's early morning, and 300 Spartan warriors are standing in perfect formation. Their bronze armor gleams in the dawn light. Their red cloaks flutter in the breeze. Then, as one voice, they begin to sing. Not a wild, barbaric war cry, but a slow, haunting melody that echoes across the battlefield. The effect was absolutely terrifying to their enemies. Most ancient armies went into battle screaming, yelling, and working themselves into a frenzy. But the Spartans advanced in perfect silence except for their synchronized singing. Imagine being a Persian soldier and seeing this wall of bronze and red moving toward you in perfect formation, singing what sounds like a funeral hymn. But the Paean served multiple practical purposes beyond intimidation. First, it regulated breathing. The slow, rhythmic nature of the song forced warriors to control their respiration, preventing the hyperventilation that could lead to panic or exhaustion. Modern military research has confirmed that controlled breathing is crucial for maintaining performance under extreme stress. Second, the song created unit cohesion. When hundreds of men sing together, it creates a powerful psychological bond. You're not just an individual warrior anymore. You're part of something larger, something unified and unstoppable. This group identity was crucial for maintaining formation under the stress of battle. Third, the Paean served as a timing mechanism. Different verses corresponded to different phases of the battle approach. The opening verse was sung while marching toward the enemy. The second verse began when they were about 200 yards away. The final verse started when they were close enough to see individual enemy faces. But the Spartans didn't just sing the Paean. They had an entire repertoire of battle songs for different situations. There were songs for advancing, songs for holding position, songs for retreat, and even songs for different types of enemies. One of the most famous was called the Song of Castor, dedicated to the divine twins Castor and Pollux, who were patron deities of Sparta. This song was reserved for the most desperate battles, when the Spartans were facing overwhelming odds. The lyrics roughly translated to, "We fight not for ourselves, but for our brothers. Death in battle is not defeat, but glory." The Spartans also had a tradition of composing new songs for specific battles. Poets would work through the night before major engagements, creating verses that incorporated the names of enemies, specific tactical situations, and appeals to relevant gods. These custom songs created a sense that this particular battle was special, destined, and blessed by divine attention. Here's something fascinating. The Spartans trained their voices just like they trained their bodies. Young warriors spent hours practicing battle songs, learning to sing while wearing full armor, and developing the lung capacity to maintain their voices during long marches and extended battles. The result was an army that could communicate complex tactical information through music, maintain morale through shared singing, and intimidate enemies through synchronized vocal displays. No other ancient army had anything quite like it. Now we come to one of the most crucial pre-battle rituals, the preparation of weapons and armor. For the Spartans, this wasn't just a practical necessity. It was a sacred ceremony that could take hours to complete properly. Every piece of Spartan equipment had ritual significance. The famous bronze breastplate wasn't just protection. It was polished to mirror brightness because the Spartans believed it reflected both sunlight and divine favor back at their enemies. The process of polishing this armor was meditative, almost prayer-like. Here's how the ritual worked. Warriors would begin before dawn, working by torchlight. They would start with their shields, the most sacred piece of Spartan equipment. Each shield bore the lambda symbol, lambda for Lacedaemon, another name for Sparta. But more importantly, each shield was passed down through generations, carrying the spirits and victories of ancestral warriors. The shield polishing ritual was incredibly detailed. Warriors used a mixture of olive oil, sand, and aromatic herbs to clean and polish the bronze surface. They would work in circular motions, chanting prayers to Athena, goddess of warfare and craftsmanship. The goal wasn't just cleanliness. It was spiritual purification. While polishing, warriors would recite the names of their ancestors who had carried the same shield. This shield belonged to my father Cleomenes, who fought at Marathon. Before him, my grandfather Pausanias carried it at Plataea. This connected each warrior to a chain of heroic ancestors, reminding them that they carried not just a weapon, but a legacy. The spear received similar attention. Spartan spears weren't just weapons. They were extensions of the warrior's soul. The iron spearhead would be sharpened to razor precision, then blessed with drops of sacred oil and blood from the morning sacrifice. The wooden shaft would be inspected for any cracks or weak points, then reinforced with bronze wire if necessary. But here's what's really interesting. The Spartans had specific rituals for different types of battles. If they were fighting fellow Greeks, they would prepare their weapons one way. If they were fighting barbarians, non-Greeks, they used different rituals. If they were fighting a defensive battle on Spartan soil, the ceremonies were different still. For foreign campaigns, Spartans would carry sacred soil from Sparta in small pouches attached to their armor. Before battle, they would sprinkle this soil on their weapons, symbolically bringing the power of their homeland into foreign territory. This wasn't just symbolic. It was a powerful psychological tool that helped warriors maintain their identity and courage far from home. The helmet ritual was particularly significant. Spartan helmets had horsehair crests that weren't just decorative. They were sacred symbols. The horsehair came from horses sacrificed to Poseidon, god of horses and earthquakes. Before battle, warriors would adjust these crests to specific angles depending on their role in the formation and the type of battle they expected. Perhaps most importantly, the Spartans had a ritual called the Blessing of Bronze. This involved passing each piece of equipment through sacred smoke from burning herbs and incense. The smoke was believed to carry prayers directly to the gods, while also purifying the metal of any spiritual contamination. The entire armor preparation ritual could take 3 to 4 hours, but this wasn't wasted time. It was essential psychological preparation. By the time a Spartan warrior had completed his equipment rituals, he had entered a state of focused meditation, his mind clear and his confidence absolute. There's archaeological evidence that supports these practices. Spartan weapons and armor fragments found at battle sites show evidence of elaborate care and preparation. The metal is polished to mirror brightness. The leather components are treated with expensive oils, and many pieces show signs of ritual scarification and symbolic markings. One of the most poignant Spartan pre-battle rituals was the final meal, known as the deipnon. This wasn't just about getting nutrition before a fight. It was a ceremony that acknowledged the possibility of death while celebrating life and brotherhood. The ritual began the evening before battle. Warriors would gather in their mess groups, small units of about 15 men who had trained, eaten, and lived together for years. These weren't just military units. They were families bound by oaths stronger than blood. The meal itself was deliberately simple. Black broth, a mixture of pork, blood, salt, and vinegar that was famous throughout Greece for being nearly inedible to outsiders. But for Spartans, this wasn't about taste. It was about identity. Sharing this distinctive meal connected them to their culture, their ancestors, and each other. But the black broth was just the beginning. The warriors would also share bread made from barley grown on Spartan soil, cheese from Spartan goats, and wine mixed with water in the traditional Greek manner. Each food item had symbolic significance and connected the warriors to their homeland. During the meal, there was a specific ritual order to follow. The eldest warrior would speak first, sharing a memory or story from previous battles. Then each man would have a chance to speak, not about fear or death, but about what they were fighting for: family, honor, the glory of Sparta, the protection of Greek freedom. Here's what's remarkable. These final meals often included poetry and music. Warriors would recite verses from Homer's Iliad, particularly passages about heroic death and eternal glory. They would sing traditional Spartan songs that had been passed down for generations. This wasn't just entertainment. It was spiritual preparation, connecting them to the heroic tradition they were about to join. The Spartans also had a tradition during these meals called the sharing of names. Each warrior would name someone back in Sparta, a wife, child, parent, or friend, and declare that he was fighting for that person's honor and safety. Other warriors would repeat the name, creating a verbal chain that connected the battlefield to the families waiting at home. But perhaps the most powerful part of the final meal was the wine ritual. At the end of the feast, each warrior would pour a libation, spilling wine on the ground as an offering to the gods and the spirits of dead heroes. But they would also make a vow. If they died in battle, their spirit would watch over their comrades. If they survived, they would honor the memory of those who fell. There are historical accounts of these final meals that are almost heartbreaking in their humanity. Plutarch describes Spartan warriors composing final messages to their families, not written on paper, but memorized by their comrades with instructions to deliver them if they didn't return home. The psychological purpose of these meals was complex. On one level, they provided comfort and unity in the face of potential death. But they also served as a kind of rehearsal for death. By acknowledging and discussing the possibility of dying, warriors could face it with less fear. Modern military psychology recognizes the importance of these kinds of rituals. Soldiers who have strong unit cohesion and clear psychological preparation for danger perform better under stress and are less likely to break under pressure. But there was also a practical element to the final meal. The food provided necessary nutrition for the energy demands of battle. The wine helped warriors relax and sleep before the fight, and the social bonding created during the meal translated directly into battlefield effectiveness. Men who had shared their deepest thoughts and fears with each other would fight harder to protect each other. The final phase of Spartan pre-battle preparation began before sunrise with a series of prayers and ceremonies that would culminate in the march to battle. This wasn't a single ritual, but a carefully choreographed sequence of events designed to transform ordinary men into instruments of divine will. As the first light appeared on the horizon, Spartan warriors would gather in formation for the morning prayers. These weren't private, individual prayers. They were collective invocations that bound the entire army together in shared purpose. The ceremony began with the king stepping forward to address the rising sun. In Spartan religion, the sun was associated with Apollo, their patron god, and the dawn represented divine approval for their cause. The king would raise his spear toward the light and recite ancient prayers that had been passed down through generations of Spartan royalty. Apollo, Lord of light and prophecy, guide our spears to find their mark. Let our shields protect the innocent and our courage inspire future generations. Grant us victory if our cause is just, or grant us glorious death if that is your will. But the morning prayers included more than just requests for victory. The Spartans would pray for specific things: courage for the young warriors facing their first battle, wisdom for the commanders making tactical decisions, strength for the veterans whose bodies were worn by years of warfare, and peace for the families waiting at home. After the royal prayers came the ancestral invocations. Each warrior would silently call upon his own family's heroic dead, asking for guidance and protection. This wasn't ancestor worship in the religious sense. It was a psychological technique for connecting with the heroic tradition and drawing strength from family legacy. Then came one of the most distinctive Spartan rituals, the blood oath. Warriors would make small cuts on their palms and let drops of blood fall onto their shields while reciting a sacred vow. My blood for Sparta, my life for my brothers, my death for honor. This created a literal blood bond between the warriors and their cause. As the sun climbed higher, the final preparations would begin. Weapons would be distributed according to strict protocols. The youngest warriors received the newest equipment, while veterans often preferred their old, battle-tested gear. Officers would make final tactical briefings, reviewing the battle plan and contingencies. But here's what made Spartan pre-battle organization unique. They had a ritual called the selection. Not everyone who wanted to fight would be allowed to join the battle. Warriors had to be selected based on spiritual readiness, not just physical ability. The king and senior commanders would walk through the ranks, looking into each warrior's eyes, checking their equipment and assessing their mental state. Warriors who seemed afraid, angry, or spiritually unprepared would be quietly excluded from the battle line. This wasn't punishment. It was quality control. The Spartans believed that one warrior fighting without divine favor could bring disaster to the entire army. The march to battle itself was a ritual masterpiece. Spartan armies didn't charge into battle. They advanced in perfect formation, singing their battle hymns, with each step choreographed and meaningful. The procession would begin with the king carrying sacred fire from the altar where the morning sacrifices had been performed. This fire represented divine approval and would be kept burning throughout the battle as a sign that the gods remained with them. Behind the king came the royal bodyguard, elite warriors chosen for their spiritual purity as much as their fighting skill. Then came the main body of the army, arranged not just by military function, but by spiritual hierarchy. The most experienced and spiritually prepared warriors formed the front ranks, while younger men learned by following their example. During the march, specific prayers would be recited at predetermined intervals. When they reached certain distances from the enemy, the entire army would stop, perform brief ceremonies, and receive final blessings from the accompanying priests. The final ritual before actual combat was called the moment of silence. When the Spartan army was within sight of their enemies, they would stop advancing and stand in complete silence for several minutes. This wasn't hesitation. It was a final moment of spiritual preparation, allowing each warrior to make peace with the possibility of death and commit fully to the battle ahead. What we've been describing weren't just religious ceremonies. They were sophisticated psychological warfare tactics that gave Spartans a crucial advantage before fighting even began. Think about it from an enemy's perspective. You're facing an army that has spent hours performing elaborate rituals, singing haunting songs, and preparing for battle with religious precision. These aren't desperate men fighting for survival. These are warriors who believe they have divine approval and are spiritually prepared for death. The psychological impact was enormous. Ancient sources describe enemy armies that were already demoralized before the first spear was thrown, simply from watching Spartan pre-battle preparations. The message was clear. These men are not afraid to die. They believe the gods are with them, and they've prepared for this moment with religious devotion. But the rituals also served internal psychological functions. By the time a Spartan warrior had completed all the pre-battle ceremonies, he had entered an altered state of consciousness, calm, focused, and completely committed to the battle ahead. Modern neuroscience would recognize this as a flow state, where performance is maximized and fear is minimized. The group rituals created what psychologists call collective efficacy, a shared belief in the group's ability to succeed. When hundreds of men have prepared together, sacrificed together, and committed together, they become more than the sum of their individual parts. So what can we learn from these ancient warriors and their elaborate pre-battle rituals? On the surface, these ceremonies might seem like primitive superstition, blood sacrifices, hair braiding, and appeals to ancient gods. But look deeper, and you'll see something remarkable. a sophisticated understanding of human psychology, group dynamics, and performance optimization that modern military science is only beginning to fully appreciate. The Spartans understood that winning battles requires more than just physical strength and tactical skill. It requires mental preparation, spiritual readiness, and unshakable confidence in your cause and your comrades. Their rituals created psychological states that maximized performance. Controlled breathing, focused attention, group cohesion, and the elimination of fear through acceptance of death. These aren't primitive concepts. They're advanced psychological techniques that modern athletes, military units, and high-performance teams still use today. But perhaps most importantly, Spartan pre-battle rituals remind us that humans have always needed meaning, purpose, and connection to something larger than themselves when facing extreme challenges. Whether you call it divine favor, team spirit, or psychological preparation, the need remains the same.